What did people really eat in the Middle Ages? Forget Hollywood banquets and kings feasting every night. The truth is stranger, and often much harder. Most peasants survived on dark bread, watery soup, and beer that was safer than water. Meat was rare, sugar almost unknown, and vegetables far more important than we imagine. And yet, when nobles did feast, their tables overflowed with roasted swans, stuffed pigs, and exotic spices that peasants could never even name. The medieval diet was not just about food, it was about survival, class, and faith. Before we dig in, do one thing for me. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. I love seeing how far the madness of medieval history travels. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we uncover the strange, shocking, and crazy truths of the Middle Ages. To understand what medieval people ate every day, we need to leave behind the images of endless banquets and golden chalices. Those scenes existed, yes, but only for a tiny fraction of society. For most people, food in the Middle Ages was about survival, not luxury. The medieval diet was shaped by three forces: class, geography, and religion. Your social class decided whether you had access to meat, spices, and white bread. Your geography determined whether you ate more fish, more grains, or more vegetables. And religion placed strict rules on when you could eat certain foods, especially meat. For the majority of peasants, daily meals were simple, repetitive, and often dull. Bread was the cornerstone. But this was not the fluffy white bread we imagine today. It was dense, dark, and made from rye, barley, or oats, grains cheaper than wheat. Sometimes the bread was so coarse that it contained pieces of husk and grit, which wore down people's teeth over time. Alongside bread came pottage, a thick stew made from whatever vegetables and grains were available. It could be flavored with herbs, onions, or leeks, but meat was rare. When meat did appear, it was often salted pork or scraps of bacon, stretched as far as possible to flavor the pot. For many peasants, a single piece of fat or bone boiled into the stew was enough to give the impression of meat. Beer and ale were consumed daily, even by children, not because people were trying to get drunk, but because water was often unsafe to drink. Ale was weak in alcohol but safer, and it provided calories. In fact, for many peasants, liquid bread was as important as solid bread. Fish also played a crucial role, especially in coastal regions or near rivers. But more importantly, the church required fish on fast days, which could be up to half the year. This meant salted herring, dried cod, and sometimes freshwater fish became staples in the medieval calendar. Meanwhile, the wealthy lived in a different culinary universe. Nobles ate white bread made from refined wheat, spiced dishes brought from distant lands, and meats of all kinds: beef, pork, venison, even peacocks and swans. Their meals were not only for nourishment but also for display. To serve an animal whole, roasted with feathers or skin restored for show, was a statement of power. But whether rich or poor, the medieval table was influenced by the rhythm of the seasons. There were no freezers, no refrigerators. Fresh fruit and vegetables were eaten in summer and autumn. In winter, people relied on salted, smoked, or dried foods. Hunger in early spring, when stores ran low and new crops had not yet grown, was a common and terrifying reality. So when we ask, what did medieval people eat every day? The answer depends on who you were. For the peasant, it was bread, pottage, and ale, the bare minimum to survive. For the noble, it was a performance of abundance and wealth. And for everyone, it was a constant struggle against hunger, faith, and the turning of the seasons. One of the strangest things about medieval eating habits was how different meals were compared to ours today. Most peasants only ate twice a day, once in the late morning and once in the evening. Breakfast, as we know it, was considered unnecessary for adults. Children and workers sometimes ate in the early morning, but for many, going half the day without food was normal. The food itself often shocked outsiders. Pottage, the daily stew of peasants, was not just vegetables. Sometimes it contained weeds, nettles, or even tree bark in desperate times. Anything that could be boiled for calories found its way into the pot. Cheese and butter appeared in many peasant diets, but not the creamy, rich versions we know today. Medieval cheese was hard, salty, and aged simply to keep it from spoiling. Butter was often rancid, but still considered better than nothing. For nobles, the curiosity came not from survival food, but from excess. Spices were the greatest luxury of the medieval table. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves traveled thousands of miles, costing more than gold by weight. A dish heavy with spice was not just tasty, it was a declaration of wealth and power. Some combinations sound bizarre to us today. Sweet and savory were mixed freely. Meat dishes were flavored with sugar, honey, and dried fruit. Imagine eating beef seasoned with cinnamon or chicken cooked with raisins and almonds. For the medieval palate, this was sophistication. For us, it feels almost alien. Color was also part of the meal. Nobles enjoyed food dyed with saffron, spinach, or beetroot to create bright, surprising presentations. A roasted pig might be served golden yellow. A sauce could appear deep green or red, not only for flavor but for spectacle. Drinks carried their own curiosities. Ale and beer were common, but wine was mostly for the rich. In Northern Europe, wine was imported and expensive. In southern regions, especially France, Spain, and Italy, it was more common. Still, water was rarely trusted. If you drank it, you boiled it or mixed it with something stronger. For celebrations, foods became even stranger. At noble feasts, entire animals were reconstructed to impress guests. A roasted peacock might be served with its feathers sewn back onto its body, standing tall on the table. Sometimes multiple animals were combined. A chicken stuffed into a duck, stuffed into a goose, stuffed into a pig. It was theater, not just food. Even the order of meals was different. Soups, meats, breads, sweets, all could be served together or in unusual sequences. The medieval feast followed rules of spectacle more than logic. And while peasants looked with envy, they also mocked the absurdities of noble feasting. Songs and stories from the period often joke about greedy lords who ate too much while their servants starved. Food, in the Middle Ages, was never just nutrition. It was class, culture, and sometimes comedy. Behind the colorful feasts and simple peasant meals, there was a darker truth. Hunger haunted the Middle Ages. For most people, food was never guaranteed. It was a constant struggle, a question that returned every single day. Will we eat or will we starve? Famine was a regular visitor. A bad harvest, a cold winter, or a war could leave entire villages without enough to eat. In such times, peasants stretched their pottage with anything: weeds, tree bark, acorns, even ground-up bones. Bread was sometimes made from whatever grain could be found, mixed with husks and dirt, producing loaves so hard they damaged teeth. Spoiled food was another hidden danger. Without refrigeration, meat rotted quickly, especially in summer. Fish could be preserved with salt, but not always well enough. Spices were sometimes used not only for flavor, but to mask the smell of decay. And many people, desperate not to waste, ate food that today we would immediately throw away. Stomach sickness, food poisoning, and deadly fevers followed. The poor suffered the most, but nobles were not immune. At their feasts, overeating was a danger. Doctors of the time often warned against excessive humors caused by too much meat, wine, and spices. The wealthy paid for their indulgence with gout, kidney stones, and other painful conditions. While peasants wasted away, lords groaned from their own kind of suffering. Diseases linked to diet spread silently. Ergot poisoning, caused by fungus in rye bread, created hallucinations, convulsions, and sometimes death. It struck poor communities who had no choice but to eat contaminated grain. Gout, the disease of kings, became a symbol of noble gluttony. Malnutrition, ironically, was common in both rich and poor. Too little food for peasants, too much of the wrong food for nobles. Religion also added to the darkness. Fasting was required for much of the year, banning meat on Fridays and during long periods like Lent. For peasants already eating the bare minimum, these fasts made life even harder. For nobles, the rule was bent with loopholes. They turned to expensive fish or found creative interpretations, like declaring that beaver tails counted as fish. The specter of hunger shaped everything. Peasants feared the hungry gap of early spring, when old supplies were gone and new crops had not yet grown. Many starved during this period, and chronicles describe desperate families eating whatever they could find. Markets themselves could turn deadly. If bread became too expensive, riots broke out. Mobs stormed bakeries or butcher stalls, accusing sellers of cheating. Authorities punished harshly, but the anger of the hungry was stronger than fear of the law. The medieval diet was not only simple or strange, it was dangerous. Every meal carried a risk. Too little food, spoiled food, or food cursed by superstition. Survival was never certain. So while nobles roasted swans and peasants ate their dark bread, all of them shared the same shadow, the fear that tomorrow there might be nothing at all. If the peasant's table was defined by survival, the noble's table was defined by spectacle. Eating was not just nourishment for the elite, it was theatre, politics, and power on display. A noble household might begin the day with bread and wine, but the real feasting happened later. At midday or in the evening, the great hall filled with music, chatter, and the smell of roasting meat. Long wooden tables groaned under the weight of food, while servants rushed back and forth with trays, pitchers, and steaming dishes. Bread was white, made from finely sifted wheat. Unlike the dark, gritty loaves of peasants, this bread was soft, prized, and a visible mark of wealth. It was so respected that nobles often used slices of bread, called trenchers, as plates. At the end of the meal, these bread plates, soaked with meat juices and sauces, were given to the poor or to the dogs. Meat dominated the noble table. Venison from the hunt, beef, pork, chicken, goose, and even more exotic animals like cranes, herons, and swans. A roasted boar's head might arrive as the centerpiece, its tusks polished, its mouth stuffed with fruit. Peacocks were served with their feathers reattached, brilliant blue and green tails spread in dazzling display. Spices were everywhere. Nobles used cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and pepper in quantities that would seem absurd to us today. The stronger the spice, the stronger the message. We are wealthy enough to season our meat with treasures from the ends of the earth. And it wasn't only taste and smell. Color was equally important. Dishes were dyed gold with saffron, red with beetroot, or green with spinach. The feast was a rainbow, designed to astonish guests as much as to feed them. Entertainment accompanied the food. Minstrels played music, jesters cracked jokes, and sometimes live animals were brought into the hall as curiosities. Food was served in multiple courses, each one a display of abundance. Guests might be presented with fish, meat, and sweet dishes all at once, blurring the order we expect today. Yet for all the glamour, noble feasting also had rules. Who sat where, who was served first, and who received the largest portions were matters of hierarchy. To be seated near the lord or king was an honor. To be placed far away meant humiliation. Even the way one ate mattered. Table manners became part of identity, separating the refined noble from the uncivilized peasant. Still, this abundance came at a cost. Nobles often ate far more than their bodies could handle. Chronic overeating led to gout, kidney stones, and other painful conditions. Doctors warned against excess of humors, but the temptation of endless roasted meat was too strong. For nobles, food was not only life, it was status, politics, and entertainment. A feast was a performance where every bite whispered of wealth and power, and in the great halls of the Middle Ages, food was the stage upon which lords and ladies declared who they were. The way medieval people ate may feel distant, but its legacy is still with us today. Every time we sit down at a table, echoes of the Middle Ages linger in our habits, our foods, and even our words. Take bread, for example. For peasants, dark bread made from rye or barley was the foundation of survival. For nobles, white wheat bread was a mark of wealth. That association has never disappeared. Even today, white bread is seen as refined, while darker loaves are linked to poverty or simplicity. The medieval divide still shapes how we think about food. Ale and beer, once the daily drink of peasants, remain cultural staples in Europe. In fact, the very idea of beer as a people's drink and wine as a noble's drink comes directly from the Middle Ages. What began as necessity, avoiding unsafe water, became tradition, woven into festivals, meals, and national identities. The influence of spices is just as powerful. In the Middle Ages, cinnamon, ginger, and pepper were worth more than gold. Their rarity made them symbols of wealth. Today, spices are cheap and common, but our obsession with flavor, variety, and exotic foods reflects the same medieval desire: to taste the world and show status through the plate. Even fasting rules left their mark. The Church's demand for fish on fast days shaped diets for centuries. That is why fish remains central to Christian traditions like Lent. It is also why many regions of Europe developed strong fishing industries, creating cuisines built around cod, herring, and shellfish. The noble feast also changed how we think about eating together. Banquets in the Middle Ages were not just meals, they were stages where power was displayed. That idea of food as performance still exists. When leaders host state dinners, when families celebrate weddings with lavish banquets, when chefs compete to create dishes that dazzle the eyes as much as the mouth, all of this is a continuation of medieval theater at the table. But perhaps the deepest legacy is psychological. The fear of hunger that haunted peasants shaped generations. The hungry gap of spring when food ran out created a cultural memory of scarcity. Even today, in many cultures, wasting food is considered sinful. The obsession with storing, preserving, and always having enough traces back to a time when famine was only one bad harvest away. At the same time, the gluttony of the nobility left its warning. Medieval doctors spoke of balance, of humors, of moderation. And while their science was flawed, their advice was not entirely wrong. Too much food, too much luxury, too much indulgence. It led to pain, disease, and early death. A lesson that still applies in our modern world of abundance. So what did medieval people eat every day? The answer lives in our bread, our drinks, our spices, our celebrations, and even our fears. The Middle Ages are not gone. They are on our plates, in our glasses, and in the way we think about food itself. So now you know what medieval people really ate every day. For peasants, it was bread, pottage, and weak ale, the bare minimum to survive. For nobles, it was white bread, endless meat, and spices worth more than gold. Two worlds separated by class, but united by one truth. Food was never just food. It was survival, it was power, and it was fear. The Middle Ages remind us that every bite carried meaning. Bread could mark you as poor or rich. Spices could declare your status, and hunger, always lurking, shaped the rhythm of life from one season to the next. Today, we can eat almost anything we want at any time of the year. But behind our comfort lies a history of scarcity, struggle, and extravagance. A history written on medieval tables and still visible on ours. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video with another strange, surprising, and crazy chapter from the Dark Ages.